How's it going, everybody? Today I have Brian Martinez from Honey Badger Radio. We're just going to talk about, well, mostly some woke stuff happening in media and also some more recent issues. So let's just dive right in. How are you doing today, Brian?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me on your channel to talk about these things.
Sure. One thing I was curious before I start off, why are you Doge?
Oh my God. It's kind of a really dumb story, but basically, way back when we were starting this whole thing off, we were using Google Hangouts.
Okay.
And on my Google Plus, which is linked to my Google Hangouts, my avatar was the Doge meme. It was just a picture of the dog because I liked the Doge meme at the time. I just thought it was funny. And so I just used it as my thing, and it basically became like associated with me because that's what it was. And then, like, I don't know, when we went into where we were hosting shows that were a little bit more involved, and I was using open broadcaster software, and we had these characters, they wanted me to stay the Doge, so they just you know, the dog just sort of stayed. And I guess I don't know, it's kind of silly. It's, you know, it's definitely light, and it's one of the reasons why I think our audience is a little bit younger. I think we mostly have like millennials and some older guys. And yeah, but it's really, there's really no magic to it. It's nothing special.
Right. But I love, you know, avatars and stuff like that. It adds a bit of lightheartedness to otherwise what could be serious issues, right? So I do notice that the women are always the honey badgers usually.
Yes.
And there are no male honey badgers. I mean, they always come animal. Is that on purpose?
That was on purpose because the honey badger, you know, the whole like honey badger thing is that it's females that are, you know, essentially going against the grain and speaking out for men. So all of the other men that work at HBR or that appear on shows, they're not badgers because we're men that are helping out. So we have our own thing.
Right. Okay. So let's get into some prevailing subjects here. So I'm not what you call a comic book fan myself, but I pay attention to that world and, you know, see what ends up in movies, and you know, I follow a lot of people that talk about comics and such, and I notice it's a bit of a mess. I mean, it's, you know, there's all kinds of, you know, new, you know, downright gross things piling up just so they can try and get some kind of narrative out there. Do you how involved are you in comics now, if any, and do you have any thoughts on all that?
Oh yeah, I have lots of thoughts. So I have been into comics, and I have a personal history with them because when I was growing up in the west side of Chicago, my family was super poor. And my father worked as a bean counter for the newspaper. My mother, she raised us, and then when she got to a certain, I would say when I was maybe like 6 or 7, she started working as well. So we had to, just to make ends meet, right? So I say that to say that there was a period in time. So I was always like a kid that liked to doodle and draw.
Sure.
There was a period in time where my mother wanted to bring me comic books, but even though they weren't expensive, they were still a little bit too expensive for us. So what she would do is she would get these, they were sort of like packages of 10 random comic book issues that had the covers removed because I think it has something to do with the distributor, you know, getting a little bit of a return on their, you know, the seller getting a return on their investment from the distributor. So they would send them the covers of the books they didn't sell, and then they would take the books and they put them in these packages of 10, and then they would offer that for $1. So, you know, $1 gets you 10 comic books. Now, the comics were completely random. They could be, you know, you didn't know what you were going to get. But my mom would buy those, and they were also kind of old books too, you know, from the 70s or whatever.
Sure.
So my mother would bring some of those home sometimes, like maybe once a week, and she would give them to me, and I would read them, even though I didn't know what had happened before and what would come next, because like the odds of getting the next issue
story or something, right?
Yeah, you were just getting like a snippet of something, right? but I was really fascinated by it. I love the art, you know, and so it made me a comic book fan. And then when I was able to buy them on my own, you know, I'd take my little allowance and I'd go buy like 5 or 6 books, you know, and then just read them. Um, so I do have a lot of history with comics. And then I you know, wanted to be a comic artist. Currently I am a comic artist. I'm working on a book. And in addition to that, I've also observed what you are talking about.
Mhm.
And the thing about so what's going on is actually, like, it's obviously not limited to comics. There's basically an attack happening on all of our culture. Like, all of our stories are being upended, they're being subverted, they're being turned on their head. And this is not simply like people taking a degree of artistic license to explore some new way of doing things, or trying different kinds of stories that are not, you know, what they would consider to be cliche or tropey. This is a desire to undo some of the, let's say, some of the very, like, DNA of stories. Like, it's getting into and it's happening everywhere. It's in film, it's in television, it's in animation, it's in video games, it's in comic books, it's even in games that, you know, like tabletop role-playing games.
Well,
They're
I want
it's
to
everywhere.
get to that just a bit, but yeah,
Yeah.
glad you brought that up.
So the reason for this is because stories, especially stories that are masculine oriented, which
Mhm.
is a lot of them, those are dangerous to these people. Okay, these are authoritarian leftist collectivists that believe that everything is socially constructed, all people are the same, and therefore any discrepancies between people is the product of oppression, and therefore meritocracy cannot exist. But they're also extremely anti-theist. And when I say that, I don't just mean that they don't believe in, you know, they're not Christians. I mean that they despise the very idea of something beyond the material world, right? Now, I'm not a religious person, but I understand that there is a lot of value that came out of Christianity. It had things to offer. We could call them Aristotelian beliefs. If you don't want to make it religious, you can look at Aristotle, where they pull a lot of that from. You know, the idea of virtue and vice, the idea of right and wrong, whether that comes from a place of religion or not, is not really the relevant thing here. Because I know that there's lots of, you know, people who are in the men's movement that are atheists, or they're agnostics or whatever. And I'm not saying that this is like that they're doing things wrong. I'm saying that no matter what you believe, whether you're religious or not, if you believe in something like objective morality, like that there is such a thing as right and wrong, then you have to understand that these people are against that. Everything to them is subjective. Everything, there is no right and wrong, and they literally reverse everything too.
Right.
You know, without getting into any specifics, we can do that later if you want.
Sure.
You can look at multiple instances in all of this media where a woman can do something absolutely evil that a man couldn't possibly do, but they will explain that this is okay because she is aggrieved, because she is, you know, it's something personal. And this is not just because they're women, but that is a useful way to, it's a useful vehicle to get that in, because people tend to sympathize more with women. But it is all about essentially reversing everything, dealing with ethics, with morality, with virtue, with right and wrong, etc. So when you remove all of that and you you know, invert it, people can't tell what's right or wrong. There is no good or evil. Everything is subjective. It's all a matter of your point of view. And what does that do? It demoralizes people. People don't feel like there is such a thing as right. And in fact, they tell you the reverse. This is why they have essentially demonized and subverted Superman. They've done it to Captain America. They've done it to basically any person that is what many scholars describe as an aspirational hero.
Uh-huh.
So there are aspirational heroes, and then there are cathartic heroes. What were you going to say?
No, I was your talk about the women, and trying to explain their evil acts kind of reminds me of what Disney's trying to do with things
Yes.
like what's the
WandaVision.
yeah,
WandaVision, yeah.
and also things like Maleficent or
Yeah,
Cruella, I
absolutely.
think, yeah.
Absolutely. Because this is the thing. They're celebrating evil, and I know that some people are sensitive to when I say evil, because I do believe evil exists. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're um, religious or not, because, like, for example, if you're just a Randian objectivist or a libertarian that believes in the non-aggression principle, then you're basically saying aggression is an evil act. It's used to essentially, get power, get resources, whatever, and in a way that is not ethical. So yeah, they literally reverse it. They always do it along these sort of feminist lines, because that's where all this comes from. It is a feminist thing, whether you're talking about critical race theory or you're talking about the queer theory or whatever. It all comes from feminism. So it has the same belief in this sort of like class warfare, either between men and women or gays and straights or blacks and whites. Doesn't, but it doesn't matter. At the base of it, it's all the same. It's all coming from the same place.
Right.
So
Well,
yeah, go
one
ahead.
thing that I wanted to kind of bring up is that I've been kind of trying to debate with myself whether this is coming from the top down or the ground up, because on one hand you could say that ivory tower feminist ideology kind of seeps down into the mainstream and kind of and it becomes like more commonly casually accepted things. I really do believe that feminism is there, but on the other hand, what you're talking about, the subjectivism, that's the kind of gauging average people regardless of principle and trying to respond to what they think they want, and therefore this kind of, so if you get what I mean here, it's kind of hard to know where it's coming from, the top or the bottom.
I think it's coming from the top, but I do think that people at the bottom are prone to go along with it because there is a bit of a weakness in people, especially if they're pretty liberal. And when I say liberal, I don't mean leftists. I mean liberals separately. Liberals tend to be open-minded. They tend to be open to new things. So if if an institution like the entertainment industry creates a piece of media and they say, here's a story of Maleficent, and it's going to be from her perspective, and we're going to sympathize with her, and we're going to present her story, then open-minded liberal types, which is basically most people, they're going to say, well, I'll entertain this idea, and then they kind of go along with it, but it wears them down over time. This is why they can go, they can be open to these things. But I will say that I wonder just how popular these ideas actually are, because I know that Disney is putting this stuff out there, and it's out there in the mainstream, but I don't know how well received it actually is. I've seen a lot of people that are conflicted or even unhappy with these kinds of choices to take characters like Maleficent and Cruella de Vil and making them into heroines that are just sort of rebellious, or they're fringe people that are on the outskirts. And a lot of people don't seem to be thrilled with it. I don't know if it's doing well. And this is the thing that the current sort of streaming service model, it's served by this, because people who own subscriptions to, say, Disney Plus, they may not watch that. They may want it for something else. Maybe they want to watch Gargoyles or some old movie from like a while back, and so they own a subscription. Well, to Disney, in Disney Plus's eyes, they're not tracking, or they don't have to track how successful a film is, because everyone who owns a subscription could either watch or not watch. And I know that they have like an additional fee, like if you want to watch a new movie like Black Widow, you have
Oh,
to, shell out additional money. But at the end of the day, like inevitably, if those people keep their subscriptions, then it will just become available for, everyone who has a subscription. So I think that in what I'm getting at is I think the subscription model can distort how successful a film or show like Cruella or Maleficent or these other sort of subversive
sure.
narratives. So you can't really tell how popular it is. But going back to the original question, I believe that it's mostly top down. This is the way that feminists operate. This is the way leftists operate. If they want to change things, number one, they don't have any patience. They want it yesterday. Number two, they believe that the best way to get this yesterday change is to immediately go to some authoritative source and make them essentially, push that on everyone else. So
Right.
they can't, they can't enshrine it in law, but if they could, they would.
Yeah.
So,
Well, since I've been thinking about your answer, and it actually kind of makes sense in the context that, I don't think feminism ever really started out from the bottom necessarily. It was a mostly
no.
aristocratic phenomenon at the beginning, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
It's always been a top-down thing. And the weird thing about it is this is let's assume for just a second
Mhm.
that anything that feminism has ever asked for was actually legitimate. If we assume that, all they would have to do, women would have to do, is ask men for something, and men will do it.
Right.
Feminism makes it. It is one of the best grifts in all of human history because it makes an appeal to something that it claims does not exist, which is men caring about women, in order to get what it wants, which is basically resources and power for men, which women were already, they already had access to. They just didn't have access to it in the same systemic way that men did. But they had more because we value women more than men. So, we literally built everything in civilization and society. Everything. We built it for women primarily because we were trying to offer them protection while they continued to have, children.
Right. Well, this brings me to something I've been kind of wanting to ask you about. In terms of the support for masculinity as such, for it as its own end, do you think that one side of the political spectrum is more supportive of that than the other? I mean, the answer seems kind of clear, but I wanted to kind of
Yes.
get your thoughts on it.
I have just partly from my own experience, but also when I look at what everything is kind of boiling down to in terms of in what ways does the left support men, and in what ways does I guess you could say the right, or I prefer to say, yeah, I'll say the right instead. Yeah.
Okay.
In what way they support men. And first of all, in my personal experience, I have a show, one of the regular shows called the Fireside Chat. You were on it once.
Yes.
And what I usually do is I try to invite people that are, I get MRAs on, but mostly I try to get people who are not MRAs, but are somewhat, maybe they're adjacent, maybe they're involved in the conversation, or they're in other areas. And the purpose of it is for me, first of all, just to get to know them a little bit, but also maybe I'll get them to think about this from the men's issues perspective, because I think that that's really the issue, right?
Yeah.
So when I get people from Comicsgate on and they're trying to understand why are stories being told this way, and I tell them, well, this is why, because masculinity is a threat to authoritarianism, which is basically the easiest way to put it. And then I get to them thinking about it. So I have invited people from left, right, and center to come on. And consistently, I very rarely get leftists on. Very, very rare. And I ask them, and I'm really nice about it. And I say, look, I may only challenge you on a couple of things that we don't have to get into, other sort of, purse puppies that you might believe in. But they won't talk to us, especially, sort of feminist types. They won't talk to us. And I've reached out to Big Red. I've reached out to, you know, well, because I think Big Red is great. I mean, she's really good for us, if you think about it.
Right.
But like I've reached out to plenty of people like that. Centrists, they're typically fine with it. I don't have a problem with them. And conservative types are also more than willing to come on. So what I have determined, and Karen has echoed this because she believes the same. She does a lot of AM radio appearances and interviews these days.
Yeah.
We both agree, and I think this is a fact. Conservative types are trying to figure out what's going on. They see that there's a problem with men, women, divorce, families, children, and that we're feeling the effects of these things, but they're not red-pilled. They're just trying to figure out what's happening. So they are open to talking to us. And so we talk to them. So I believe that conservatives are far and away more sympathetic to us than more left-wing types. And I think that what it comes down to, and I'll just say this, okay?
Yeah.
Even though there is, like, unless you're a red-pilled man or woman, for that matter, it doesn't matter where you sit on the spectrum. You see men as a kind of resource. I mean, and they are. Like, when it comes down to is that men cooperating is the most powerful resource on the planet for human beings, right? Men working together to make society better is basically that's it, right? Everyone in general, whether they are aware of it or if it's subconscious, they know that men are important, right? We need them. If we didn't have them, there'd be no human race. It's not just for the reproductive reasons. We'd all just die.
Well,
So,
I kind of want to branch off from that actually, and kind of flip that question in its head. So, a lot of this use of men, for someone like me, it kind of really rubs me as kind of very gynocentric still, and so I want to kind of like have a variant on that question I just asked and say, is either side more or less gynocentric?
No, but I don't think so. Although I haven't been using the term gynocentrism as often. I think that I spoke to a guy named Steve Moxon who spoke at ICMI 2020, and we talked about the debunking of misogyny, that basically misogyny doesn't exist. There's no such thing. It's a made-up word by feminists to basically control male behavior. And the reason, just in brief, the reason why it doesn't exist, in case people say, well, of course misogyny exists. No, it doesn't. The reason why is because you use misogyny as a label that you can plaster on men to get them to do what you want. And the only reason why they would do what you want is because they don't want to be seen as misogynist. So the more accurate, well, I think it's more accurate, but it is phylogeny, which is basically the love of women. So I agree that we do value women, and I don't think that's ever going to change. I think that we value women more than men inherently. Like, there's an inherent value in women, and the value that we put on men is not inherent. It should be, and I disagree with that, but it isn't. Like, this is the reason why many tribes, they have rites of passage for men, and where if you complete the rite of passage, you are then called a man. It's basically a social attempt to compensate for the inherent value that women are already bestowed with. So I would say that no, I don't think that blue-pilled people, regardless of their political affiliation, are more or less gynocentric, although a case could be made that leftists are more gynocentric. I think you could say that because while people who are more conservative are still going to, approach the gender, I guess the gender conversation from the perspective that men are to be more responsible, because this is an issue that is a human problem, that we don't put women in the same, we don't hold them as accountable, right? But there is a difference between conservatives that don't tend to hold women as accountable as men, and leftists who believe women have absolutely no responsibility, and men have to have all the responsibility. Does that make sense?
That does make sense, and I would even add that leftism is vastly predicated in more eliminating masculinity
Yes.
altogether. So we got that going on.
Yeah. So I will. So I'm gonna like modify my answer. I believe that people on the right and people who are conservative are going to be more gynocentric than not. But I think leftists are far more gynocentric and they're anti-masculine. The other thing about it is that what I would like to see, and this is the challenge that I put to conservatives, there's a couple ways we could form our society. We could go and basically we could double down on the left-wing route, which is to basically say that women are already like, they shouldn't be responsible for anything, right? This is what the left believes. Women are not responsible for their own life choices. They don't make decisions. They're leaves on the wind. They're victims of this or that systemic, institutional,
and they're powerful at the same
systematic. And they're capable of doing anything at the same time. But the point is that the left sees women no responsibility, no accountability, and they deserve all the authority. We could double down on that and say men should also not have any responsibility and we shouldn't ask them anything of them or whatever. Or we could go the other way where the conservatives will say, women, they have a duty that they might believe. They wouldn't want to necessarily make it like a law unless you're talking about Sharia, but they have a duty to, have families, and men have a duty to provide and protect those women and their kids. But they still put far more emphasis on men's responsibility. So what we could do is go the other way and say, well, women have a responsibility that should match men's responsibility, as opposed to no one has responsibility. Because that's basically where both sides go if you were to just take the men's issues thing and follow it down that path. So you're either going to go the route where if we want if we should want our civilization to be composed of people who are going to take responsibility for their choices, especially as adults, and everything that comes with that. And that includes men and women on what, the closest thing we can get to a level playing field. Or we go the other way and we say, no one has responsibility. Everyone do whatever you want. They should especially be without judgment. And that's really the only, in my opinion, those are the only two outcomes that you can come to if you're striving for anything that remotely resembles equality, which is something I don't personally believe in, but I would say at least fairness. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to wonder if there's like a third
option.
Third option in which we kind of take things rationally and try and like have people kind of go their own way, but sometimes on a parallel path if they want to have a family. And
for sure. Yeah. I would. Okay, so as individuals, because I'm just talking in like broad strokes here. As individuals, people should be allowed to do whatever they want, but provided that that's not infringing on the human rights of other people. But what I'm getting at with the broad strokes thing is, so what feminism did is essentially it has decreed in the simplest of terms that responsibility and authority are not at all connected. And so they believe that women, or not even women, feminists, they should have all of the authority, none of the responsibility. And you cannot have authority without responsibility. If I say, oh, I'm going on a trip, Vernon, I want you to watch my dog for me while I'm out. And I'll be gone for a week. Okay, you are responsible for my dog if you agree. Yeah. But you also have authority over my dog. So if you need to, you can basically put him in a crate. If you think he's going to misbehave while you're out, things like that, right? But if I told you, I want you to watch my dog for a week, but I don't want you to touch him. I don't want you to have any authority over him. You cannot control his behavior. You have to let him do whatever he wants, But if I come back and he's dead, it's your fault. That's when you want to remove, that's removing authority, but maintaining responsibility. This is what feminists do, because if you look at it, they're asking, and this is how they operate. This is why I know they're always top down. Feminists insist that men provide for women. It hasn't changed. The only difference is that the way in which feminists insist that men provide for women is through government social programs like the welfare state, like all of these like grants for university, for child support, you know, and it broadens. Like they want more. They want free college. They want free healthcare. Where does the money for that come from? And I know that, again, there are people who would say, well, that's got nothing to do with men's issues. It absolutely does, because men pay the overwhelming majority of taxes. Right. And that's taxes that goes into the government and then goes to women. So men are providing for women through the state. Right. And it's, go ahead.
No, so sorry. Because, you know, like, you know, where does the government get the money from? The answer to that is always they don't have money. They only have our money. And our money usually means men's money.
Yeah, 80% of the 80% of the welfare is men's money. And so what this means is it doesn't matter if you marry a woman, have a family, and then you guys get a divorce and then she asks for money from you, or if you stay single. If you live in the United States and you pay taxes, you are giving women your money. It doesn't matter. Of course, one is more severe than the other, but the point is the same, right? And this is the way feminists operate. So what does that ultimately result in? Well, women who are benefiting from the welfare state, they're not responsible. Like there's nothing that's asked of them. They are simply women getting money. So no responsibility, but all of the authority. Men, on the other hand, all of the authority or all of the responsibility, because they have to pay, or I mean, they don't have a choice, right? None of the authority. They can't ask anything of women. Like they can't say, could you please like get a job so I don't have to pay you? Like that's not an option. So this is like the degree to which things are lopsided. So that's why I say, and I know that feminists hate this, but that's why I believe, because if we go the route of, so basically as individuals, people should be able to choose whatever they want. But if we look at this in broad strokes, if we take away men's responsibility, right now, men's responsibility is the only thing keeping this ship running, right? If they all walk away, society collapses. It's the end of everything if they stop. So we can't take that option. What would be much better is if we asked women to, like, you know, woman up and be a part of the solution. And that starts by acknowledging, because this is the thing, when I think that when you have these government programs like the welfare state, and you get women that are just asking for more and more and more, they're either super sinister, which is probably, you know, more common than most people would like to admit, or they just don't know that this money doesn't come from the government, it comes from men. Right. And so, like, this is an unsustainable model. So I think that if we want the same healthy, functioning society, it's going to take women matching men in their own way. And by the way, there is a third option now that I think about it, but it's probably the least attractive.
All right.
If women don't want to take responsibility that matches men, and they already don't have that now, they shouldn't have the privileges that they enjoy. They just shouldn't. Like, if you're, because right now things are already really unbalanced, but like, if you're a woman and you don't want to be responsible with the way you use your vote, you don't want to, like, you don't have a good enough understanding, or you don't care about like what our society runs on, which is men's labor and men's cooperation, right, as it stands, and you just want to waste everything. You don't want to take any personal responsibility for anything. Well, why do you, like, you shouldn't have the right to vote. I'm sorry, but you shouldn't. Like, I mean, it's not a right anyway. I don't think the vote is a right. I think it's a privilege, but I think it's often mistaken for a right. But what we have now is the opposite of that, because only men are required to register for the draft to get the vote, and women are not. So they get it by virtue of just being women. And they have used it tremendously irresponsibly. It was only because of the women's vote that we have the welfare state and the size of the government itself as big as it is.
Right. Well, I was trying to kind of formulate a question as to, how do we incentivize women to take up those kind of individual accountabilities and responsibilities? That's a question I've been trying to ask people in general a whole lot. But this kind of leads to a relevant subject. Is because something I notice to some degree in the not the manosphere per se, but to some conservative women, let's just say that, who profess to be sympathetic towards men. The prime argument to me seems to be, men's issues affect women too. This is almost the first, if not only, argument they use. It's like, you can keep on saying, boys are, mutilated at not at pretty close to birth, and okay,
it's basically rape.
Right. Yeah. But the thing is, and we try and come up with these, like, men's issues for men's ends, and it just doesn't seem to be so much attractive. But then we say, they affect women too, and they're like, oh, they affect women too. Now we'll care.
Mm-hmm.
And I really that sticks in my cross.
Right. Yeah.
Correctly. So, but I kind of noticed that recently in a certain interview by Cafe that we've been kind of discussing that one, and I know Honey Badgers have been spoke about it at least twice. But yeah, is that a symptom? This kind of trying to get on women's good side just to profess to care about men?
I think in part it is. I think the idea that we have to make appeals to the ways in which women benefit by essentially acknowledging men's issues and trying to solve them is in part it's that. And maybe it's because I agree with you. It's really annoying. Like I guess there are some people who basically would say that the ends justify the means, and this is like worth doing even if I don't care for it. But I think that the problem with it, and I said this, if you frame men's issues for women, regardless of their political affiliation, if you frame it for women in such a way that it basically says or argues, hey, ladies, this will help you too. This is how you benefit from helping men. The problem with that is that it maintains this framing that only the ways in which women are affected matter. And that actually strengthens leftism and feminism because they operate under that model. So what we need instead, and this is not easy. I mean, there are ways, like conservative women are more likely to be married to husbands and have children who could be boys. So you could say, well, look, you have children, you have a husband, but in a way that still frames it on how you feel. And I think that what women need to do, and this is the thing that I think is the challenge, they have to have they need to develop a sense of justice. They need to have not social justice, just right and wrong, right? Just justice. Like, what is just? Because that's this is why I don't say equality anymore. I don't like it. I don't think it's relevant. I know that people in the men's movement use equality. This is just the same. Using the term equality to make your argument is giving feminists what they want, because they're the ones fixated on this idea called equality, which doesn't exist. The only thing that exists, or that's fair, because equality is just oppression under a different name, is justice, what's right. And that's it, right? So what we need is to sell women on justice. And I read this article from 1912 or 1914, very old. And it was an article about men. And I don't know if I agree with this, but it is kind of a interesting thought. The author of the article said that when it comes to things that are uniquely masculine, the sense of justice is something that is unique to men. And that's what he said. Now, I'm not saying I agree with that, but it is something that I have thought about, because why would that be? And maybe, and this is the challenge, right? But maybe women don't women have never been challenged with the idea of exercising dispassionate and fair justice because they generally operate under a more self-absorbed way, and this is because it benefited them. Like, not necessarily because I think women are immoral. I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is that if you're a woman and before the Industrial Revolution, before we had all of these conveniences, and you had like a kid or 2 or 3 kids or 10 kids, you didn't have the luxury of thinking about what was fair because you were concerned about surviving with your family. And so women didn't generally do that. Instead, they basically told men, I need you to make my life, easier so that I can raise my kids and we give them the best chance of survival. And when men formed civilization so that they could individually provide and protect for their families, they came up with the concept of justice. Because they were like, well, how do we police each other and our children and our wives?
Right.
So I don't know. That's just my thought.
Right.
But
Well, so the idea of justice, when it comes to the whole unique to men thing, I think it was uniquely taught to men, and it's not that women are incapable of it. They were just kind of never encouraged as such.
Yeah.
I'm gonna offer a bit of a hot take actually, because you mentioned, women with families, children rather, having their needs, supposedly understandably geared towards them, and that's why they were kind of more, shall we say, parasitic and manipulative. Well, I consider manipulative behavior to be a more, actual, not in the realm of instinct, but in the realm of, active, like consciously done, So right, so they almost don't have that biological excuse anymore. As soon as humankind developed the consciousness to even be manipulative, shall we say, they've lost that excuse. So yeah, I think
Oh yeah, I'm not giving women a pass. I think that women are actually more authoritarian than men in general, and because again, this is like women have evolved to be authoritarian because they always got their way. It goes back to, and this is why I'm really grateful because I get to talk to all kinds of different people on my show. I spoke to a Orthodox Christian guy from Canada named Jonathan Pajot, who talks a lot about symbolism, and I asked him, because we were talking about the hero's journey, which goes back to the comics and stories and culture thing. And I was asking about the hero's journey, and he was explaining how the hero's journey is embodied in the story of Christ. And I thought it was super interesting because it doesn't matter if you're religious or not, but like if the Christ story is untrue, like it's not factually accurate, and such a man never existed, and such a man was not the Son of God, it sort of doesn't matter because the story of Christ resonates with people, especially men, because it is this universal hero's journey. And this is why it works in every other medium that it's been done with all of the changes. It goes back to Beowulf. You could talk about Star Wars, whatever. Right. With women, though, I asked him, okay, so if that's the male hero's journey, and if you replace the man with a woman, it doesn't seem to work unless you change, fundamental elements of it, like the Wizard of Oz. But with the female hero's journey, what is that? Because I said, if the male journey is Christ, then what's the female one? And he said, the Virgin Mary. And I said, really? And I said, okay, so then what is the story of the Virgin Mary that makes it unique to women? And he said, women asks the question. And so men respond to the question, women ask the question. And I said, I was taken aback by that. So what I'm basically getting at is all throughout human history, and I'm not making excuses for women, but this is like we have to look at the actual scope of what we're dealing with here. All throughout human history, from probably before we had language, women have been pair bonding with men, selecting them sexually for whatever it is they needed at the time. So they're asking the question and the man is responding. And then from beyond that, they basically make requests or demands, or they manipulate or whatever to get men to do what they need, to give them what they need. So men have essentially served women in exchange for, the survival of their genes ever since the beginning of humanity, maybe even before that. So if that's true, then there is no point at women's evolution where they ever had to stop and say, well, what's the right thing to do? Because they've always done, well, what do I need? What do I need right now? And so I guess what I'm saying is that, again, not giving them a pass, but this is what we're dealing with. We're looking at millions of years of women getting what they want whenever they ask for it. And so, like, to basically tell them, could you please put your needs on the side for a moment and let's talk about what's right for society, that's a really tough question. I think that maybe, because we're going back to the guy who was talking about justice, we've never asked that of women. So why would they have that developed? We've asked it of men, and yeah, I think it was taught to them, but it was probably to keep society from falling into chaos. And this is why we honor that. Like, going back to the stories, why do we have a concept of honor? And this is, again, another thing that is, I don't want to say I don't think it's unique to men, just like justice, but I do think it's a predominant trait that men admire about other men. The reason why we have it is because an honorable man is like a just man. Usually those things go hand in hand, because he does not behave in his according to his like lizard brain or animalistic desires in the moment, but women are more likely to do that. And I think it's because we haven't developed that in them. Maybe, I don't know. So does that make sense?
Well, it does make sense. It's funny. Entire chivalric codes have been kind of, sprung forth to surround this sort of thing. It's almost crazy.
A real quick comment about chivalry, because I think that we've lost something in chivalry that has value. Right now, chivalry just means observing the way that men treat women, and that's like a small part of the larger picture. I think that when you look at, there is something worthy of admiration in a chivalrous man or a chivalrous gentleman, but not because of his treatment of women. It's mainly because of his relationships to his nation, his society, his other men, his peers, his children, his job, whatever. All of those things are like what I think we should be encouraging in men. And I think that men do have, like, if you see a man and he's like behaving in a way that you find honorable, I think it makes other men, they have a love for that, if that makes sense. Like the kind of love that men have for other men of honor, especially under sort of like, extenuating circumstances, like if they're at war or if they're engaging in some dangerous task, it actually is in some ways a stronger bond than men have for women. And it's something that we've totally lost. Like, I mean, some guys that are actually like overseas and, at war or engaged in conflicts are probably doing that. But I think that like societies like Rome, for example, they probably had something like that for men, no matter what they had to do, no matter what their position was in society. And I think that this is something that we as modern men have actually like really like lost our connection to.
Well, it's because when chivalry was co-opted by the women, it became from men, men having that bond to men basically turning against each other in supposed competition for said women.
Yes, that's a corrupting factor. This is what I'm saying. Like, there is a chivalry or bushido or whatever you want to call it. Like in every society, we had something like that. So that means, at least the societies that flourished, that means that it did have utility, and it wasn't for women. But yes, you're right. Women co-opted it and they made it about them. And this is the thing. Like this is what this is the one of the big things that feminism does. And I mean, maybe not even feminism. You could apply because the thing is that I use the word feminism because it's a shorthand, but the problem is that most people today are feminist. Most people, like even if they claim to be conservative, they're not honest with themselves, or they haven't come to the realization that they are still feminist. They're probably just more along the lines of a second wave feminist as opposed to an intersectional feminist.
Yeah,
so
what you call feminism, I more broadly again call gynocentrism. I know you don't use gynocentrism so much, but I just say you fucking gynocentrism.
Yeah. No, but basically I just say they're being feminist because they are, and it's actually worked with some conservatives that I've spoken to, where I say, well, you're basically still a feminist, and they'll be like, what are you talking about? I don't believe in, these crazy things over here. And it's like, yeah, but you believe in the fundamental narrative that men have oppressed women all throughout history to the benefit of themselves and at the expense of women. And I was like, but that is absolutely untrue. But this is what most people believe. So in that regard, most people are feminists, because how could you possibly observe objectively men and women as cooperative, complementary agents if you believe in that fundamental lie about their relationship to each other? And because it's that belief that actually sets men against men. Because if the average man believes that most men are misogynistic, right, then they're gonna be more primed to want to defend women from those men. And of course, those men happen to think that they are the exception, when the truth is they're the rule. And most men, no men hate women. None.
Right.
Like at worst, they're indifferent or they're misanthropic. They just hate everybody.
True.
Because that's usually the case. So, but that's because of like some trauma they haven't dealt with. But yeah, so though I forgot what the question was.
well, no. I mean, we were talking about, just this idea that.
Oh, you were calling it gynocentrism.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I think that just calling them feminists is actually more. It bothers them more because they don't want to be associated with that label. But it's also more true because, I've seen conservative commentators like Milo Yiannopoulos years ago. He did this where he said feminism is extremely unpopular, and look at this study that shows that only like 20% of women identify as feminists. You guys are losing. Maybe they don't identify with it, but they believe that they believe in it. It doesn't matter what they call themselves. The label's irrelevant.
Right.
What matters is, do they believe that, women only recently got rights? Because that's the narrative that you have to fight against. It's just not true. Like, no matter what you talk about the vote, that is literally women getting treated as a higher class of citizen than men from the moment they got it. And this is something that people just don't get. Like they don't want to, because I think that the more a person invests in a lie as an idea, as their truth, the more difficult it is for you to get them to face that lie and say, you were wrong, right? And not just wrong, like, you were deadly wrong. Like this belief in this idea is getting people killed.
Right. I mean, so to kind of branch off from that one, one of the big issues facing, that I'm concerned with is that, all the things that, are for men's well-being is seen as anathema to society at large. Yes. And, it's this kind of woman-centeredness that's, so conditioned in our psyche at this point. We do it unconsciously a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But yes, it's like, I keep, I'm firmly of a belief that men can be loved and cared for that way.
Sure.
And so I just, I refuse to believe it's an impossibility.
I don't believe it's an impossibility, but I do think that I think it has to start with men loving each other first.
Okay. All right.
And because I don't think like asking women to do that. Women tend to think more collectivist, and men tend to be more individualist. Like if I've actually had this conversation where I was describing, because I was basically saying, okay, do you know why we have a left wing and a right wing?
Huh?
Because we have a male and a female.
Right.
But like otherwise there'd be like a third option. And the fact is everyone falls on the spectrum of left or right in some capacity. Left being it's all about like, solving problems through centralization through the government, through the state, and right being it's all about less state, right? Now, people who are conservative and religious or whatever, they're not far right, but they're sort of in the center somewhere because sometimes religious people can be authoritarian. And that means that they want to use the state to get what they want. Think of like Islamic countries are far left, even though they're theocratic. Okay,
I
so but so that we have two genders, and that's why we have two wings. And I think it influences. So women tend to be more collectivist. They tend to see the world as groups of people. So and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they operate in the social sphere. And so they have to make generalizations, and they also women feel safer in groups of other women. So this is why they think in a collectivist nature. Men are more individualist, but I think what we need is that men have become so individualized that they see themselves as completely separate from other men. And part of this, I think, is a product of that narrative that makes men antagonistic towards other men. So what I think needs to happen is, I'm not saying that men should be collectivist, not saying that, but I think that men need to form fraternity with other men. They need to create a community with each other. They need to befriend each other. They need to mentor each other. They need to share ideas, share wisdom, and what
connect
will
as individuals.
but there are still individuals like, you have your own interests. It's not about saying men as a collective have to do this, but rather that men need to form community. And I think that the main difference between, I guess, what I'm calling community and what would be considered collectivist is community is it's voluntary. So it's all about voluntarism as opposed to collectivism, which has a little bit of force backing it, right? You're a woman, you're one of us now, so you have to like fall in line. Or you're a leftist because they tend to be pretty collectivist. But most men are looking for a way they're looking for purpose, right? They're looking for a way for them to contribute to something greater than themselves. The fact that they have been so isolated, and to a degree, they've been feminized as well. This makes it harder for them. But the fact that they've been isolated makes them prone to being preyed on by collectivist feminists. And what they do is they utilize them like a resource because feminists see men as a resource, in order to serve their ends. So, for example, Antifa. Antifa is run by women. Like the people who are in charge of various Antifa chapters are 9 times out of 10 women, middle-aged women, and they work in academia. So they are women who are accustomed to working with young people, and they know how to get them to do what they want. And so what do these women do? They offer female approval from themselves and from their peers to men if those men serve Antifa and their ends. And those men go, because I don't think that and I know this because I watched and I'm sorry for going so long, but
That's all right.
I watched I listened to a podcast by a woman named Nama Cates. She was doing a series on incels. And I had this suspicion because I know that incels get demonized, but I defend them because I understand their situation. And I don't think that they should be that they're basically men at the bottom of society. Like this is like other than homeless guys, right?
Right.
But so I watched the thing about incels, and my suspicions were validated, which is that people who join groups like Antifa, men, whether
Right.
they join Antifa, skinheads, the KKK, the alt-right, Black Lives Matter, Islamist terrorist
Yeah.
organizations. Like
Exactly.
most of the time, those guys are incels, or they are men more broadly that
Mhm.
are looking for something to serve, something that, because that's what men, it's like we're hardwired for that. Like I don't know if that's ever going to go away. A desire for men to serve something greater than themselves. They want to be a part of something. And if they think, or if they're convinced the world is in danger because of, and then you name, evil tribe X. It doesn't matter, right wingers, insurrectionists, black people, whatever it is. And we need you to help us fight back. And those groups are almost always run by women. Okay, even the alt right, like women were motivating those guys. So these guys joined these groups, but it's not because they agree with them. It's not because they even believe in them. There was one incel on the podcast that was part of a skinhead group and an Islamist group. And, like he just wanted friends. He just wanted community. I
Uh-huh.
know it's a weird place to go, but so my point is, men are looking for this anyway. But these outlets are extremely unhealthy. They're run by authoritarian, collectivist types, feminists
Right.
most of the time, and they're basically weaponizing masculinity against other tribes of men.
Right.
And those are the people who always get hurt, when these things clash, because these women, they risk nothing because they're never on the front lines. And even
Right.
if they were, they don't tend to get assaulted or attacked because they're women. So they can safely encourage all of this violence. So this is why I'm saying men are going to try to form community, to form fraternity with other men, because it helps them. It gives them purpose. It gives them motivation. It encourages action. The problem is that that's going to exist no matter what. So we should be offering men a healthy place to do that, and not these politically motivated violent groups. And that starts with men having sympathy and compassion for other men. Because one of the problems I think we have now is that because this antagonistic narrative of there are bad men that abuse women out there, and I'm a good man, so I'm going to protect, this like overinflated chivalry
Yeah.
that is damaging. It's actually dividing men against each other, and this is all because of feminism. But
Right.
if men can like put that aside and they can form, healthy fraternity with other men, then what will happen, and this is what I believe,
Sure.
those men will become reacquainted with their masculine self, and they will form friendships with other men that can't be broken by women.
Uh-huh.
Because I think that the love that men have for other men can surpass their desire to be validated by women. Like,
Uh-huh.
and the thing is, it's easier. Like incels, for example, they always talk about how they want to be in relationships, but if they had a friendship, that wouldn't matter as much. I mean, there'll be tough days, but they'll
Yeah.
be okay. They'll be okay. And what I think would come of that is women will start seeing men in the collective sense, because that's the way women see groups. They tend
Yeah.
to be more collectivist. And if there is a lot to admire there, then maybe they'll start to love men too,
Yeah.
and not see them in this way. So this is what I mean. They're gonna have to, because otherwise everything's gonna go to shit. So
Sure. Right. So I want to close on one idea that I'm trying to kind of inject into the subject, and that's the idea of competition. Now, competition, gets, in my opinion, a bad rap. Because they think it's about the dog eat dog. I hate that term. They're trying to like kill each other off and
about
just
dominance, yeah.
right, sure. But I have an alternate take here, and I've spoken to this disability in my last year's ICMI video. The idea is that competition is about really testing yourselves with other men. When we're talking about the men here, so it's almost like seeing each other better one another. By mutually getting better, rising to the top and stuff like that. So it's not so much about dominance hierarchy. It's about a constant act of improving one another. You know?
Yep, absolutely.
Right. And
So
go ahead. Go ahead.
oh, I was just gonna say, yeah. So feminists frame competition as antagonistic, as and the fact is, I think they know this. Competition, when it's healthy, which I'd argue it's probably most of the time.
Oh yeah.
It only serves to improve everyone involved, and so like, but feminists don't want men to improve because again, if men like actually become, I think anyway, if men become actualized with their masculinity, like because I think that men have been largely disconnected from it. If they actually get realized with their masculinity, then what will come with that is a rejection of, feminist orthodoxy, which is basically authoritarianism. If the people who are going to be the most skeptical, that are going to challenge these things, are the people who are the most independent. And that comes from confidence in part, which manifests from competition. So yeah, I think that competition absolutely gets a bad rap. I don't know if a lot of, MRAs argue that or not, because I know that there is like there probably is a contingent of men's rights activists that feel that men should be liberated in the same way that women have been liberated. They're more like mythopoetic types, and,
yeah,
they're like second
second
waivers that have basically tried to apply that to men.
Right.
And that usually means they believe on some level the toxic masculinity narrative, and that's where the criticism of competition comes from.
Right. Yeah. But I brought up the competition thing because I do think that because you mentioned men loving each other and by extension kind of helping each other in this way instead of turning against each other. And I'm just here thinking, what better way than competing together?
Yeah, absolutely. That
Right.
I mean, think about it. Like, I don't know about today, and I was never a big sports guy, but when I was much younger, I remember the 90s, and I remember the Bulls, the Chicago Bulls, right? When I lived in Chicago, and I wasn't really a big follower. And this is the thing that's really interesting about masculinity. I was never a big sports person. My father was. But I remember working as a busboy at a cafe in the summer when the Bulls were like winning the championship, and everyone felt the energy, including me, even though I didn't really follow it. But watching those guys succeed, and they were at the peak of their ability. Everyone playing in that game was at their absolute peak, right? Even the other team. That's what competition does. And I think that not only do, in this case with the Bulls, I forgot what the other basketball team was, because it was a three-peat. They won 3 championships in a row. But not only did the members of the Bulls probably love each other and brought the best out of each other, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, etc., but they probably also loved the other team, because the other team was doing their absolute best, right? And not only that, but for a while, we who were observing all of this loved them as well, because we were seeing like it was just, I'm not even a sports person, but that was an experience that I will never forget. And contrast that against today. There was an Olympic athlete. Do you know about this story? I forget her name. It doesn't matter. There was a female. No, not Rapinoe. No. This was like she was like a gymnast or something. Okay. And she was supposed to do a maneuver and she failed. Okay. And instead of, she was part of a team, right?
Yep.
But instead of say, well, I'm gonna, try really hard next time, and then like I'll stay here and I will push the other team members to do their absolute best. These things happen, whatever. She quit and left. So and this isn't just like a hockey game. This is the Olympics. These are supposed to be the most elite athletes in the world, okay? And this woman walks off. She quits and leaves because she couldn't cope with the fact that she had failed at this thing. And so her response was to quit. Now, I'm not even going to say that it's because she's a woman that this happened, because I've seen plenty of Olympic athletes that are female that have been able to get through it. But that mindset that they can't compete, and so they don't even get anything out of it, so they just leave. I mean, that's novel. I've never seen that before. I mean, maybe it has happened, but contrast that with the Bulls of the 90s. So, I mean, it's not even close.
Right, yeah. And, you know, at the risk of sounding gynocentric, I'm not. But, you know, I wonder if this kind of spirit of competition would help women, actually.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's not even really for women because they're women. I think that if we can try to like make people stronger, more resilient, less emotionally incontinent, more, you know, that it'd be good for all of us. Like, that's the thing. Like, you can't ultimately you can't really separate women's benefit from men's benefit, because one, if you balance it out, we both benefit, both genders. But if you don't, then you're going to get, eventually no one benefits. Like right now, we're in a situation where women reap most of the rewards, and because we incentivize them to behave badly, they continue to behave badly. So even though they may be benefiting now, it's not sustainable. You know, after a while, everything's gonna go to crap. So yeah, I mean, I don't think it's gynocentric at all to basically say, well, women, why don't you try being more like men?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not in your fantasy world of, like, you know, kicking ass and like taking down like 10 dudes at the same time, like female John Wick or something. No. I mean, like, actually, you know, look at what men value, things like teamwork, honor, competition, you know, encouragement, whatever, merit, and then try to encompass some of that.
Right. Yeah. Well, these sound like some seeds for like future conversations, because this could splinter in many different, more granular ways, to be sure. Yeah. But
can I say one thing about, because we didn't really get into it too much.
Sure.
Can I say something about the comics thing from before?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to make a recommendation. There's a lot of people making YouTube videos about what's the state of comics and more pop culture more broadly, and most of them don't quite get what's happening. But I think that people really need to think about why heroes are being subverted, attacked, and otherwise deconstructed, because that's what's happening now. And you need to pay attention to that. So I want to make a recommendation. There's a really great YouTube channel called The Fourth Age, and the guy there, his name is RJ, and he basically talks about the nature of heroism and the nature of virtue, and it comes from Aristotle. Okay.
Yeah.
And I highly suggest that people check that out, because that is what's under attack. It's not about, you know, the race swapping and the gender swapping, and those things are true, and that's happening, and that is a symptom, but it's not the root problem. Yeah, those are symptoms. The root problem is heroism itself is being deconstructed, and specifically male heroism.
Right. Yeah.
Because they don't even have an understanding of heroism generally, and they're so obsessed with power that they believe that simply having power makes one a hero. They have no idea. So that's what's actually going on. I would suggest you guys check that out.
Sure, yeah. I mean, not to go on too long, but, you know, this even extends outside of superheroes. It's like, you know, male lead characters. Like
all stories.
Star Trek is ruined because of this, because of Star Trek Picard is all about deconstructing and like humbling Picard, you know?
Yes.
Right, that's what it is. So
yeah, Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who, name it, all of it. And again, this is by design. It's not an accident. Now, of course, there's a cancerous sickness in the culture of entertainment. So most, and this is another thing you have to internalize and accept, most media that's going to come out from here on out until like the entire industry collapses is going to be woke garbage, like 90% of it. And you're just going to have to don't support it, don't give it any money, you know, don't even talk about it too much on social media because you keep it culturally relevant by doing that. Just avoid it, ignore it, and encourage others to do the same. So
right. And you know, if possible, if there's something good out there, encourage those instead.
Yes,
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right, that's right.
Right, sure. Now, you know, I could have gone on a tangent about manga, but maybe that's for another time because we're just about out of time.
Okay, we can talk about it another time. Manga's on borrowed time right now, though, but I will say that much.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for like a terrific conversation, Brian. We got to do this again sometime. All right. Well,
just let me know.
Absolutely. So, well, that's it, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed our talk. Well, take care.